Hello, fifth graders. We've got the timeline of humanity out again. This is just one of 3 timelines of the whole entire time humans have been on Earth. And this is the middle timeline. This timeline takes us from 10,000 years ago, which is the beginning of this timeline, all the way until 2,000 years ago. So all the way until the year 0. So this timeline takes place in the years before year 0. Okay, we're in year 2020 right now. So this timeline takes place, the end of this timeline takes place 2020 years ago. The beginning of this timeline takes place 10,000 years ago. Now what I love about this specific lesson, this is the lesson where we look at the history of agriculture. This is where we look at when humans first learned how to grow food. Before this time, they had to follow the herd, so the herds of animals, or they had to go from place to place wherever there was food. So they would have to travel to different places to get food. Once humans learned how to grow crops, a big thing happened. They could finally stay in one place. If they could stay in one place, that meant they could build a bigger, safer shelter. That meant they could put their brains more on building tools and being creative with their artwork and their architecture. They could devote a lot more brain power to different things than just when is our next food going to be here. Now that they were able to harvest crops and grow crops right in their own backyard or their own area where they lived, they could do a lot more. It was huge for humans to be able to do that. Today I'm going to show you what some of the first crops that humans learned how to grow. The first one, and one that's on our Canvas page that I'd like you to, there's a video on it, is wheat. Now wheat is interesting. What was so important about wheat is that wheat didn't go bad for a really long time. So humans could harvest huge portions of wheat and save it for years. It wouldn't go bad, which was really important. Now wheat, they would have to do things with wheat. They would harvest it, and they would put wheat in a big mortar and pestle, kind of like what I have here. Very similar to what I have here, actually. We've got a little hole, and there's actually some wheat particles in there that fifth graders in past years have used to grind up. They put the wheat in there, and they would spend time grinding up that wheat. Now, this was long, tedious work, but once they had that wheat, once they had that ground up wheat, they were able to make things like bread, because then they had flour. And bread was a huge source of energy for humans, really important. So wheat was one of the very first things that humans learned how to grow. We'll put this at the beginning of our timeline. Here, you can't see it here, but we'll zoom in. We have wheat, olives. Okay, so olives grow on trees. So that means with olives came olive oil. So the very first bread would have just been wheat, maybe some olive oil, maybe some salt that they could harvest from the sea, and water. That was kind of it. That's all that there was for their bread. Very, very simple. It was a flat bread. The bread we have today has yeast. This right here is yeast. And yeast wasn't actually founded or used until the year 1680. So 1680, the end of this timeline is year 0. 1680 would be 1,680 years after this timeline. So humans didn't have yeast this entire time. Pretty interesting. We'll put that to the side. In the year 9,500, or I should say in the year 7,500 BC, oats came along. Humans learned how to grow oats and barley. This here is barley. We'll put barley on the timeline. This is the beginning of the timeline. Wheat and barley were kind of being harvested at the same time. Oats came next. Here are oats. Oats came in around the year 7,500 BCE. Put that on the timeline there. Next came millet. Millet is another kind of grain, and millet also can be used and saved for a very, very long time. So humans like this one. This was getting closer to 9,000 years ago that millet was first used to harvest. People, at the same time of millet, people learned how to not grow, but raise pigs and chickens and silkworms. Silkworms were used to create silk, of course, for clothing. During this time, rice was also an important crop. We'll put rice during this time as well. About 9,000 years ago, or 7,000 BC, people in now the Pacific Island areas were able to grow bananas. We know what bananas look like, and thank goodness for that, because we still eat a lot of bananas today. The other thing that people learned, which you are probably very familiar with this, it's something that you probably crave, is sugarcane. Sugarcane, people learned how to grow sugarcane 7,000 BC, or 9,000 years ago. People learned how to grow sugarcane, and just like we love it now, people went crazy for it then. So that's here on our timeline. As we move further down our timeline, chickens, more chickens in Asia. The people that lived in today's Asia countries were able to raise chickens. Poppy seeds were here. Here we've got poppy seeds. Another thing that is able to be in storage for a long time without going bad, so this could be used. So we'll put this is about 6,000 BCE, or 8,000 years ago, people started using poppy seeds. Further on down, about 5,000 BCE, which would also be about 5,000 years ago. I'm sorry, 7,000 years ago. Yes. People were able to gather, here it is, sorghum. Sorghum is it's a little bit like syrup, but it's much thicker, and it isn't sweet like syrup is. I mean, it's a little sweet, but it's a lot more bitter. But it is a natural sweetener, but it kind of looks like molasses as well. So when people couldn't get their hands on sugarcane, they would use a natural sweetener called sorghum. That was about 5,000 BCE. During this time, sheep were also, people learned how to raise sheep, which meant wool, so people could now create wool clothing. Sesame seeds during this time, and eggplants here too. Another and very important thing is people learned how to grow cotton. Cotton from a plant. I have cotton here. This was a game changer. Cotton now was very difficult to harvest. It took a very long time, but it was well worth it because they could create a lot of clothing and different artifacts out of cotton. So this was, about in the same area as sorghum, about 5,000 in the year 5,000 BC. So that's about 7,000 years ago. on down the timeline. Down here in the year 3500 BCE, we've got corn. Oh, we love corn. And think more than just corn on the cob, but cornmeal. So they could ground up corn just like they did with the wheat and be able to store it for a very long time. And you could create bread out of cornmeal. So that was here. Squash was also. This is a type of squash, and squash is also important. If you know, if you put squash in a dark place, it can stay, or in a cool, dark place, it can stay good to eat for months, all winter long. So this is an important crop for humans to use as well, as a good source of energy and nutrients for those months when you couldn't grow a lot of crops. So this is about the same time. Beans, again, beans are an excellent source of protein. So when humans weren't able to hunt or raise livestock, they were able to eat beans. One that I wish you were here to smell. This is a vanilla bean. Vanilla beans were very popular because they added beautiful flavor to their food and also smelled delicious. So vanilla beans is something that humans were able to grow. And again, this was in the year 3500 BCE, which was about 6,000 years ago, 6,000 to 5,000 years ago, probably closer to 5,000 years ago. At the same time, got another thing that I know for a fact, many of you, not all of you, but many of you love, and that is cacao beans. Cacao beans, we know, make chocolate. Chocolate. First discovered in Central America during this time, and chocolate was almost like a currency. People would pay in chocolate because they loved it so much. And it started out, it wasn't a hard thing like this, it started out popular as a drink. When you think of hot chocolate, you think of something you eat warm, by the fire. But the chocolate that they ate at first was like a warm, thick, chocolatey syrup type thing, and that's what they ate, and that is what they loved. And when they combined it with sugar cane, oh, that's a whole different story. This here is dark chocolate. This is 88% dark chocolate, so it's very, very bitter. Milk chocolate is what, when you think of that tastes really sweet and sugary, that has milk and sugar involved. So this is 88% dark chocolate. At the same time, potatoes. Woohoo! Who doesn't love a potato? Potatoes are very, very versatile. They could do all sorts of things with potatoes. They could store it all winter long and it's still good in the spring. Or they could eat it, mash them, boil them, put them in a stew. All sorts of things can be done with potatoes. Alpacas were raised, llamas were raised during this time. Really interesting stuff. Moving further on, yams, which are like sweet potatoes. That's about here. More oil from a palm could be used during this time. Moving further on down, here we've got sunflowers, sunflower seeds, tobacco, which is used to smoke or to chew, and another type of barley called little barley. This was all first harvested in the year 2500 BCE, which is about 4,000 years ago. And finally, the last thing I wanted to show you in this section here, about 4,000 years ago, is coffee. And again, I wish you were here to smell it, but coffee has a very long, interesting history behind it, and this could be something that you choose to research. But coffee was first introduced or first founded, or being able to, humans could grow it as a crop in the year 2000 BCE, about 4,000 years ago. Now, of course, we know that more things had been discovered and over the course of the years, but we're just focusing on this timeline, which again was 10,000 years ago to 2,000 years ago. Look at all of these things, and thank goodness for these humans that learned how to harvest and grow and harvest this food. It's absolutely amazing. So your assignment today is to choose one of these crops that you see on this timeline here and do some research. Figure out the history behind this crop. Learn all about how it was very first used to how it's used today. Maybe how humans have changed how we use that and how we use it today. So I want to see a history of one of these crops, or maybe you want to choose 2 of these crops or 3 of these crops, but at least choose one crop to do a full history on how humans have used it, all the way from when we first used it to today. You can choose how you would like to present that information, whether it's in a slideshow or creating a timeline, kind of like what I have here. I'm interested to see. Have fun. Thanks.